Why do so many people walk out of job interviews thinking, that went very well, only to realize 3 months later that they've actually joined the wrong company? And what if I told you the biggest red flag isn't what they say in the interview, it's what you actually never asked? Most candidates focus so much on impressing the employer that they actually forget something very critical. An interview is a two-way conversation. And if you are not asking the right questions, you could be saying yes to a very stressed, confusing, and a toxic team without even knowing it. Top of the morning, everyone. My name is Tshidi and I'm back with another video. Today, I'm breaking down the best questions that you should ask in an interview to truly understand the company, the job, and the team that you really are actually going to work behind that polished job description. And this matters right now because in today's job market, getting the offer is not the goal. Getting the right offer is the best thing. And later in this video, I'll also share one question that instantly reveals whether the manager is supportive or a micromanager. Let's get right into it. And here's one of the mistakes that I once made a few years ago, where I joined this particular company. On paper, they looked perfect. The role was perfect, great title, very competitive salary, clear responsibilities. But 3 weeks in, I actually realized that I wasn't doing the work that I was hired to, and I did not want to work with my line manager. So here's the first most powerful question I should have asked. Can you walk me through what a typical week or what a typical month looks like in this particular role? Notice how I didn't say, walk me through how a day looks like. A week gives you patterns, meetings, reporting cycles, firefighting moments. Here's where it actually gets a bit more interesting for any candidate. Listen for that vagueness. If they say, every day is different, that's not necessarily bad. But follow up with, what are the top 3 priorities for this role in the first 6 months? That question does 2 things. First thing is, it shows that you're serious. And number 2, it forces a bit of clarity from whoever's across the room. If they cannot define success, that's normally a really interesting red flag. Maybe might be orange, but you now need to be very careful in the next question. And this also leads to the next layer, because understanding the tasks is one thing, but understanding the expectations is another. The second group of questions that you should ask is reveal how you'll actually be measured. This is where most people actually drop the ball because they don't want to get to that stage. You don't want to know what you actually will do. You want to know how you'll be judged or measured in what you do. So you can ask something like, how will success be measured in this particular role? It's simple, it's powerful, and it's very direct. Then try and go a bit deeper than just only that particular question. And that question could be, what does exceptional performance look like compared to the average performance? Now that you're not just asking about survival, you're asking about growth. In that role that I spoke to you guys about, I worked with somebody who actually constantly told me to be a bit more proactive. But one thing that was never defined was what proactive meant. That's like being told to run faster without knowing where the finish line is. If they can clearly explain what we call KPIs or feedback cycles or any development plans, that's a very good sign. But if it's fluffy language like, we need someone dynamic, you need to actually dig a bit deeper. And speaking of digging, let's actually talk about the team, because the team can make or break your entire experience. The third section of questions that you need to focus on is questions that reveal the team culture. Now, this is where you actually stop interviewing for the job and you start interviewing for your sanity. Ask something like, how would you describe the team culture? That's normally the warm-up. That's where you're trying to get them to loosen up a bit. And then once they've answered that, you can ask the next question, which is, what makes someone successful in this team? The question is actually golden because you're not saying what makes somebody successful in the company. If they say something like, people who are willing to work long hours and always be available, that tells you something that you should be aware of. If they say people who collaborate, communicate clearly, and take ownership, that tells you something also very different. You can even ask something further like, how does the team handle conflict or disagreements? Most candidates are actually scared to ask that. But conflict is normal, and the real question is how it's actually managed within the team or within the company culture, or even within that microculture. Avoiding conflict doesn't mean healthy culture. It often means unresolved tension. And that's where the question that I promised earlier comes in. Ask the hiring manager something like, how do you typically support your team members? Now watch very carefully, as do they actually talk about the regular check-ins? Do they talk about coaching? Do they talk about any developments? Because that's also very important to try and listen out for. Or do they only focus on results and deadlines? Because if they focus on results and deadlines, you need to start being wondering, are they going to also look at my own mental health to try and protect that if we are under because of too much work? The way the answer tells you whether you're actually getting a mentor or a taskmaster is very, very important for you to look at. If this really feels slightly uncomfortable, good. Growth questions should also feel a bit more bold. But we're not really done yet, because the next questions that we need to focus on actually reveal about stability and direction. You also need to understand the bigger picture of that particular team and the company. And in this instance, you ask questions like, what are the biggest challenges the team or the company is facing right now? This is not negative, it's very strategic. Every company has challenges. The question is whether they're actually aware of some of these challenges and whether they're actually transparent about some of those challenges. Because in some instances, you already know people in that team that have shared with you some of the challenges, and you're just making sure that they also can speak about the same challenges. You can then also go on to ask, well, how has this role evolved over time? If it's a new role, you can then ask the question slightly different, say, what prompted the creation of this position? Is it growth? Is it expansion? Is it just high turnover? And yes, you can ask that very tactfully. Why is this position available? Because then you also want to understand, is it one of those three things, growth, expansion, or is it just high turnover? If 5 people have left in 2 years, that's information that you actually need to understand about that particular environment. And it's also trying to understand, am I going to be the 6th person to leave in a space of 2 years? Your career is not a guessing game, guys. And that's one of the things that I want people to always remember. Questions about growth and future opportunities are then very important. If you're ambitious, this part matters the most. What opportunities are there for progression in the next 2 to 3 years? Yes, I know in some instances here, managers start thinking that you're ready to leave that position. But some managers that are a bit more mature will also understand that you want to be able to grow within that particular position. And then you can always follow this up with, how do you support professional development? That could be whether you're talking about, do they fund courses? Do they encourage internal mobility? Or is growth something that you actually expect to figure out alone? Remember, a job that pays you well but traps you is expensive in the long run. Now, let me pause and ask you guys this question. What's been the hardest part of your interviews recently? Is it the nerves, unclear answers, or not knowing what to ask? Please drop it in the comments so that at least we can discuss this. I'd genuinely love to know. And because interviews shouldn't be like interrogations, and anytime you get into an interview where you feel like you're being interrogated, you should always be very careful. They should actually feel more like intellectual conversations with people that respect you. And here's a recap of what we've actually talked about, guys. Today we covered 5 main things that I want you guys to understand. Number 1 is what the job actually looks like week per week. Number 2, success. The second, how success is actually being measured. The third one is what the team culture truly feels like. The fourth is stability, direction of the company. And the fifth is about your own growth opportunities. When you ask 3 of these questions, you shift from being a desperate candidate to actually being a very strategic professional. You're not trying to be chosen. You are the one that's actually choosing. Before your next interview, pick at least 3 of these questions and practice saying them out loud, whether in front of the mirror, because confidence is not about being fearless. It's about actually being prepared and wearing a very nice jacket like me. If you found these tips helpful, please don't forget to like, don't forget to share, subscribe, and share this content with as many people as you can. Until we meet again in the next video. Peace.